This talk is called Symfony 4 internals, or deep dive into Symfony 4 internals. It's actually same thing with Symfony 3 internals. It was the same thing with Symfony 2 internals, and I'll promise you, this will also be the Symfony 5 internals. The Symfony internals has been pretty much the same since version 2, not forever. And yeah, and I want us to know it and have a look what it does and what it doesn't do. I mean, show of hands, have all of you used Symfony before? Some of you used Symfony before. Have you looked inside the vendor Symfony folder? A little bit. Excellent. Excellent. Is it someone who hasn't seen Symfony before? Is it someone who's a really good Laravel developer that wants to learn what Laravel is really about? Okay. So, sure, most of you know of Symfony. And the reason I want to do this is because I believe Symfony is just a tool. Symfony is nothing more than a tool to help you develop. And the better you understand the tool, the better will you be using and utilizing the tool. Short about me, my name is Tobias. I work at a company called Happier. We try to match people and companies together. I do some Symfony stuff. I run PHP meetups in Stockholm, and I do plenty of open source. I started my real open source career in like 2013, 14. PSR 6 came out. So me and my friend at a conference, we're like, hey, let's do an implementation of PSR 6. So we made PHP Cache. And at the same time, I was looking into this abstraction over HTTP clients called HTTP plug. So I was spending so much time doing HTTP plug, and when you do HTTP abstractions, it's pretty similar. It's pretty convenient to go to API clients and mail clients, and then I started to do mail clients, and I started to do like how the best practice, how to do the best client. Then I added, I'm maintainer of both Guzzle and Bus at the moment. And I write my own PSR, and I do plenty of things. My all-time favorite library is the NSA one. NSA totally violates class privacy. So accessing private properties or private methods, it's easy with NSA. I did this talk in Russia. Nobody really understood the reference, why it's called NSA. I thought it was hilarious. Anyhow, this clicker works every second time. There we go. I know most of you have done this before. I mean, I've certainly done this before. I'm like, before I knew any better, I'm like, I'm gonna build my own framework. I didn't know frameworks. I gotta build my own things that I reused to multiple customers. And this is pretty much what I want us to do today. I will give you some exercises, and I wanna push you towards building your own framework. And I don't know if you checked out the code. I don't know if you've seen the README, but I have like 20 exercises there. We won't do them all. We will pretty much do all of part 1 a little bit more. We'll see how far we'll come. It's totally fine to skip an exercise because you don't like it and just check out the next branch. It's also very fine to ignore my code and build everything yourself. But I'll try to guide you through this, and if you have questions, I mean, call me out. I mean, there's not that many people here. Sorry, it was some weird sound for me. Anyhow, so I hope you are fine with the schedule for today. It's just me hearing some voices. The next room is also coming up. Oh, that's gonna that's gonna be annoying for us. Anyhow, I started with something before I came here today. I did this. I built a little framework myself. As you can see, this is just a bunch of files, or in fact, it's only an index.php file. And it's a pretty nice framework, right? Or framework. It has two responses, you have 2 pages, and I have some admin stuff. This is actually the quickest framework there is. Nobody can argue differently. It's just 1 file and 10 lines of code. It's the quickest there is. However, it's not really scalable, right? We have to do something to improve scalability here. Someone told us that PSR 7 is a great abstraction. PSR 7 is great, someone told us. So let's try to implement PSR 7 in this. So oh, yeah, this is how it's rendered. I want you to go to this branch or go to the folder and check it out and do a git pull because I made some changes last night. I mean, just maybe typos or something. And start with my index.php file, and I want you to add your favorite PR7 implementation. If you don't have a favorite implementation, I mean, someone might come to you, but add your favorite PR implementation and just modify this class to use the request and use the response. Seems like a fine first exercise. And keep it simple. Every step is very simple, so don't like add a lot of files. Just editing the index.php file. I need some kind of feedback from you. Like, yeah, Tobias, let's go. Okay. Okay, never mind then. Yeah, just start with the first exercise. If you have questions, raise your hand or tell me or shout it out. Have you all checked out the code? Are you all set up? Okay, good. Oh, thank you. I can tell you while you're working, this is like off topic I'm telling you. I built Nyholm PSR7 because I found some issues with Guzzle. I found plenty of issues with Send framework. I found Slim not unappealing. So I looked at the specification like, hey, could we make something that's super duper strict with way less code? So I actually did it properly. I added a bunch of integration tests, and then I added my own implementation. And every line in this implementation is like 1,000 lines. Every line is like weighed on a golden scaler. So we try to remove as many lines as possible. And we're super strict with all our RFCs and all the specifications. So the end result is that we are quicker than all the other implementations, and when we have no extra features. I mean, Guzzle has this nice feature that's called create request from globals. We don't have that. That's not in the specifications, so we don't have it. We have. I mean, if you, I guess at least one of you is looking at the Nyholm PSR7, and in the documentation it says how you should create from globals. You're using a helper package. And the same thing with admitting requests. Send has this great feature, say, how do I have a response, how do I put it, I mean, how do I echo it out on the, to the web server? How do I get it to the browser? Send has this excellent function saying, just emit the response emitter. This Nyholm PSR7 doesn't have any of that. So if you want to be super strict or super fast, it's a good tool. If you want to have more convenient, there's plenty of other tools. I want to go around and sneakily look over your shoulders. Don't be alarmed. I'm going to start with you. For the first 2 or 3 exercises, there is one command to actually run the server. If you run the server, you can go to the localhost 88 or whatever to see a page that says this is the index page. And for the third exercise, there's a slightly different command to start the server. It's all in the README, it's all in documentation. So actually, to verify that your stuff is working, you just go start a server and see if you can find the index page. That should be simple enough. Some of you have successfully completed exercise 1. Some of you are still working. I'm going to give you like for a few more minutes. Feel free to go to exercise 2 if you like, or feel free to help your friend. I mean, you can skip ahead. In 5 minutes, I will tell you how I did it, and then I will introduce exercise 2. Most of you, I think all of you found the README. The README contains a bit more details that I may or may not skip, because I don't remember them, but the README contains a lot of information. So make sure, when I say, hey, let's do exercise 2, make sure to read exercise 2 to get all the details. It has some links to the documentation, maybe it says that there's a package you should use. But I'll start with my first solution. I will rudely interrupt you for a moment now. I told you this is building your own framework, and there are plenty of ways to do it. This is my way. It's not the way, it's not the correct way, but it's just my way. Make sense? So, this clicker I should return. I did something like this. I modified my index.php file to this?
Initially, the new life cycle of this object.
So what I did is I created a request from global. I'm using a PSR server request, whatever. And I instantiate my new PSR17 factory. PSR17 is fairly new. It was released less than a month ago. It's basically how PSR17 is how you create PSR7 objects. Fair? So I can do this in an agnostic way. And this the PSR server library that I created is basically a implementing agnostic way to create PSR7 things. So I created a PSR17 factory. I added this server request creator. Added the factory 4 times, which looks ridiculous indeed, but it's actually, the first parameter is like the server request factory, then it's the URL request factory, then it's a file upload request factory or something like that. So it makes sense, but it looks ridiculous here because it's the same implementation. So I created a request from the globals, and then I have a perfect server request. I look at the server request like, hey, what's the query parameters? And I use that query to check, are we on the foo page? So if you say localhost 8080 question mark page equals foo, you get to the foo response on the foo page, else you go to the home page, and then I just send the response. Does this seem reasonable? I know some of you got to similar to this, some of you didn't. And that's fine either way. You could see a problem with this, right? If we have, this is 2 pages. If we have 10 pages, I will add more if statement, else if, else if, else if. If we have 100 pages, this doesn't really scale very well, right? So let's try to move out this new response thing. Let's move it to a new class. Let's move it to a class, and maybe we call it controller. So the exercise 2 is move these responses to a separate class and call it a controller. And you might even, this is horrible for me. I'm gonna stop using it. Exercise 2 controllers. Either you start where you were left off, or you create, you check out this new branch. It's up to you. You do whatever you like. Someone also told us that having an index.php file in the project root is not a good idea, because you have to tell the web server, here's my index.php file, and you don't want the web server to be have access to all your files, because then someone can just use localhost and then go to your private images that you don't want to serve. So it's a good idea to put the index.php file in a separate directory, and call it directory public or web or call it whatever. You just move the file to a separate directory. It's good practice. Do you feel like you understand the exercise? Excellent. You're not very responsive. It's still a bit early. I'll be confident and trust that all of you like scream loudly if you don't understand the exercise. Good. I know some of you has completed this, some of you are still working, but even though you're still working, I want to rudely interrupt you to show you how I made it. I created a bunch of files looking something like this. I created my public directory, which I put in the index.php file. I created a source directory and added some controllers there. It's not a major change. I guess you all have something like this. And the controller, they're quite simple. I just added the return a new response. So this is my start page controller. It returns the response for the start page. And I have a similar for the foo page. And in my index.php file, it's quite different. First, I changed, since I put in the index.php file in the public directory, I changed this line to say include ... vendor outload, right? And here I'm using the URI path instead of the query parameter, because you have nice URLs if you use the path. So if the path is equal to /foo, then you shoot a foo controller. And I'm lazy. I'm just doing the full control like this. This is horrible. I'm gonna throw this out. And I import my controls like this. I just call them. I say a new start pixels controller, and I run. Now here's a request. Just run yourself, and I expect a response back. And I also took the liberty to add a 404 page. How does this feel? Does it feel all right? I know that some of you are struggling with PR7 and stuff. I mean, we can leave it all behind now if you like to. If you didn't complete the exercise, just check out the next branch and you'll be as happy as ever. There's still a problem here. I mean, say that we have 10 controllers or 100 controllers, we still add a lot of files in the index.php file. And we notice that every new functionality we're doing, we're adding things in the index.php file, which is something we wanna like move away from. So I wanna do something big here. I wanna introduce an event loop or a middleware runner or a relay builder. What I basically wanna do is just create middlewares. I create a routing middleware to handle the routing you saw in my index.php file. And I want to chain up all my middlewares and then run them. So they automatically call the first middleware, second middleware, and so on. And at the end, I'll get the response out. And for this exercise, consider consider restarting on this branch. And I wanted to download. Also, I told a few of you, please open the README of this repository in the master branch because that has plenty of documentation. And the documentation there says you should download a relay/relay version 1.1, not version 2, but 1.1. So you're building up this middleware runner. So you can easily add your router middleware as the only middleware in this runner. Does it make sense? Excellent. Excellent. So I like to repeat myself. So basically, remove all the routing code from index.php, put it in the separate middleware, and then use the middleware runner. When checking out a new branch, you should be aware that you should maybe run composer install to get some dependencies. One thing you could do is if you're stuck, you don't want to tell me you're stuck, you could cheat. You could go to GitHub and look at the next branch and check out the class how my solution looks and work from there. That's allowed. I mean, you do as you please. You do as you please. I'll give you a few more minutes, like 5 or 10 minutes to complete it. So how do you guys feel about the event loop? You kind of understand what it's all about? You kind of understand. I'll show you my solution. So I made a small edit to my index.php file. I created an array of middlewares like this, and then I said, here's a middleware runner, a relay builder. I make sure to build a relay with my middleware array, and then I said, hey, run all the middlewares, and I will eventually get a response back. Does this make sense? Do everybody understand this? Good. And the router middleware itself, it's easy. It's just I just copied the code basically from index.php. So, what did we really win here? Why did we do this? What's the purpose? I want to do this because I want to add more functionality to our small framework without modifying index.php. I don't want to add so much logic in index.php. And to prove that this actually works, I want you to add cache. I mean, our framework is super quick as it is already, but we need to have cache because it's even quicker. So let's add a new functionality. Let's add cache, and since it's a new functionality, we add a new middleware. And it's maybe plenty of cache libraries. I would recommend you to use something PSR cache. There is, I mean, in the README it says that PHP cache is really great. I mean, just use it if you like it. If you want to use something else, just use something else. So let's try to add some cache. I will rudely interrupt you again, like 15 minutes. Just raise your hand if you'd like some help. And if you don't want me to come by, just tell me. So I hope the cache thing has worked out okay for most of you. I will show you my solution. Again, it's not the solution, it's my solution. And what I did, I created a new cache middleware. And the middleware is quite, it's a lot of code since it's cache, but it's quite fair. I started with the middleware like instantiating my file system cache, which basically needs, it needs a fly system, and then a fly system local adapter and stuff. And when I have the cache file, it's just a normal PSR6 interface. So what I did was, I'm first checking the request. I tried to create a new cache key from the request, which are basically just checking the URL. Have I seen this URL before? Is this URL in my cache? Then I get a response back. If I haven't seen this URL before, I'll continue the loop. And you see in the middle, I see continue with the chain of middlewares and get the response. I'll let the chain run, because at some point we'll run into the router, which will return a response. So I take the response and I save it to cache. So what's really happened is our really quick framework, if you go to the same page again, I'll get a cached response. So it'll be even quicker. Fair? And the only change I did in my index.php file was adding this line. I'm just adding a new middleware. And as you can see, I can cache all the outputs from my router or from my controllers, but I didn't modify the router. I didn't modify my controllers. The router middleware doesn't know about the cache middleware, which is kind of a cool thing. So we're pretty happy about ourselves now. We kind of like our little framework. It's starting to look like a little bit as a framework. But however, this causes a problem. If adding cache, it's really hard for us to develop. Say if we want to make change to our controllers, it's really hard, right? Because we don't see the changes, because it's cached. So what we could do is temporarily disable this feature in development. But since we are software developers, I mean, we have some pride in our work. We don't want to just uncomment a line, right? We want to do something smarter. We want to introduce a concept of environments. So we have a development or local environment, and we have a production environment. And in production environment, we use the cache. So what we do need here is we could download a component from Symfony, the dependency injection container, and use that to make a difference between the environments. And what we could do also is we could move all this code to a kernel, or we call it a kernel. And the kernel's responsibility is basically to run the relay runner and to read our configuration. So next step, add the kernel, add Symfony dependency injection. If you want to, you can continue working on your code, or you can check out this branch. Also, make sure to read the README. It has some small hints there if you get stuck. You could also check on the next branch to see how I wrote the container. There is a small bonus exercise. It is to cache your container. So you basically add a lot of configuration to your container, and you could load in YAML files to your container, and then you could cache that on the disk. So next time you run it, you don't have to rebuild it. That's a bonus exercise, but first just focus on building a container. There are some links to the Symfony documentation in this as well. I've also been told it's like 2 minutes until the break. I will just grab a coffee or something and then be around here. So if you want to work on the break, that's fine. I will go over the result here in like 40 minutes, which means if you want to take a full break, you have 20 minutes to do this. Or if you don't take any break, you have 40 minutes to do this. I think this is an important step. So you may want to spend time on it. But okay, now you can do whatever you like. On 2 minutes, it's break out there, and enjoy your break. Welcome back from the small break. I just wanna you still have some time to complete this. You can ignore me if you are up to speed. I just wanted to clarify that you wanna create your new kernel, and then you want to have a container builder. The container builder should basically just add some files, some YAML files, because YAML is simple. And then you compile it, and then you can use your container like a normal container. You can use maybe container get cache to get the proper cache service. And if you're smart now when you importing the services YAML files, you can import one file if you are in production environment, one file if you're in development environment. And maybe it's a good idea to give that environment as a argument to the up kernel, or to your kernel. I wanted to like push you to the right track. I know some of you have already done this, but you have like 10 more minutes to complete this. Or sorry, you have 10 more minutes, and then I'll show you my solution. You have all day to complete this if you want to. Anyone got a question? Just raise your hand and I'll come by you. Or else I'll just sit here and wait. You kind of, have you started adding your kernel class? Do you have a clear path in your head what you should do? Someone have a clear path in their head? Excellent. I'll show you my solution now. So we were here. This is our index.php file. This is from before I started this exercise. And what I basically did, I took this middleware runner thing and put that on a separate file. So I just added a kernel. I said, hey, kernel, handle this. And in the kernel, I put the middleware runner stuff. As you can see here, I add the environment to the kernel's constructor. I said this is a dev environment, I said, and also have a debug flag for some reason. And the kernel itself is actually the biggest class in my little framework. Looks like this. I use the normal constructor and I save the properties. And I have the handle function, this is what I copied from index.php. You recognize this? And then the bonus exercise was to cache the kernel, and I'm doing this in my boot function. So here, what I'm basically doing here, I check if I call the boot function and it's already booted, just do nothing. And then I check, I create a path where I should dump it, and I check in this path, have I dumped something before? If I'm in debug, or if I'm in development, or if there is no dump, I start to building the container. So when I'm building the container, I add a container builder. I add some properties, parameters, sorry, which I think is good to have. It's like project zero environment. Then I say that, hey, I have a file loader and add it to a YAML loader, locator, whatever, so I can import a YAML file into my kernel, into my container, so my services can be defined in a YAML file and the container knows about them. And I have one services YAML file for everything, then I have a services underscore environment for my environment specific services. And then I just compile it so I can use it, and I dump it for cache, I dump it so I can cache it basically. So next time, if I'm proud, next time I don't have to build this again. I just use the cached one. Does this make sense when I describe it for you? Good, excellent. There's quite some files to our project now, isn't it? I mean, my project looks like this. I have a config directory, and I have a kernel, PHP, and I even have a var directory which I store my cache. And the services declaration looks like this. I have two of them. The main one is the big one, and then I have one from the cache environment. This was the small one. And I'm basically a bit tricky here. I declare my cache service. I just name it cache. And in development, I override this with the void cache. So which means I've solved the problem. So in development, I don't cache anything. So in development, I still get the latest update from my controllers. And this is really what we wanted to achieve, right? Is this? I mean, I want to stress: is this clear for everybody? It makes sense. I mean, some of you came to this very solution. Some of you came a very good way. But I want to make sure that this is understandable, what I'm showing you. I feel quite happy about this framework. I'm not really happy about the router. The router doesn't really scale very well. I mean, basically a router looks like this. I mean, I guess most of your routers look like this. And if I simplify, I just remove some code, it looks like this. So if I wanna add 100 more controllers here, I have to have 100 more if statements. And which basically means the CPU is like, if this path, no, if that path, no, if this path, in 100 times or 1,000 of times. So it doesn't really, it's not really performant, and especially if I add routes like this. I have some static routes and I have some dynamic routes. So dynamic routes has to do some maybe regular expression to figure out like if this regular expression, if that regular expression, etc. 100 times. I mean, that's obviously not performant. We could do some tricks here. We could say like, if the path starts with admin, then go through our admin routes. If the path doesn't start with admin, maybe the path starts with image. Yeah, image, then go through our image. I mean, we save some, we don't do 100 if statement here, we do a few. I mean, you see that how this saves some if statements. But we still do a lot of if statements, we still do a lot of preg match. So if we're a bit smarter, say, there's a super talented guy called Nikita. He wrote a blog post about this a few years ago. He basically said that, hey, what if you put all your routes in, or your static routes in an array? And in that array you have the URL, and the URL is the key, and the controller, or the string representation of a controller, is the value. So you can, with one if statement, check, does this URL exist in this array? And you know if it's a static route or not. Even if the 100,000 routes in your static array, you can with one if statement see if it's a match. That's pretty convenient. And for the dynamic routes, we can do some super smart trickery with regex to actually put all your 100 regex into one massive regex and execute that. And it looks, I don't understand this regex. I don't expect you to understand this regex. But you could ask yourself, is 100 smaller regexes, is that quicker or slower than one massive one? And basically, regex is evaluated in C, and C is super fast. So having a massive regex actually makes sense. It's actually quicker.
We can only go from open.
So I'm doing this massive regex, and I'm evaluating it, and I'm basically putting up the arguments together here, and I know. Then I call the controller. I know there's some puzzle heads here. And this is actually a way to make a routing super duper quick. This is also a lot complicated. I don't expect you to rewrite this or write this at all. But I actually want to show you how to improve the routing. Does it make sense? Good. Remember on our very, very first framework, the one we started with, we had a start page, we had a foo page. We also checked if there's a local host, we added some admin stuff, right? Remember? I want us to do pretty much the same thing now. I want us to add some security. And since security is a new thing, it's a new middleware, since a naive approach would be something like this, I add a new security middleware, and I say, like, if the IP is not localhost, and if the URL is admin, then forbid this. I mean, you have to be on localhost to see admin. And I could also be smart to say, if URL is images 4711 at delete, we gotta make sure the user is Bob, because only Bob has the permission to delete this. This is a bit messy. We're mixing two fundamental concepts. We mix them up. In security, we talk about authentication, like, who are you? And we talk about authorization, which is what can you do? So I want you to read the exercise on the README, and I want you to implement two middlewares, one for authentication, one for authorization. And I want you to, like, say, create an admin controller that only Alice the user Alice can access. Also to stress this, security is super complex. Make it super simple. I mean, you don't even have to validate passwords and stuff. And in the README, I had some I have some code snippets to show how to make basic authentication. I'll give you a chunk of time to try to add this. Just raise your hand if you want me to come and look at you. I'll be walking around. Feel free to restart your project by checking out this branch. Or continue with your own. That's also fine. I want to give you a small hint. It might be a good idea to check the authentication. And if the user is authenticated, you can store the username in a token of some kind. Then you can declare a token storage service if you want to access that username from, like in a controller. If any of you have issues with not getting the login screen up, make sure you properly admit your headers in index.php. You can't just echo out the response, you have to print the headers as well. If you look at in Nyholm PSR7, that repository, that README, it will have a short example how to admit it. You don't have to use that PSR7 implementation, it can admit any implementation. So make sure you're properly printing out the headers. I'll leave it to another 5 minutes. Or how are we coming around? You need another 10, 15 minutes? Because is anyone done with this exercise? Oh, excellent. Then I move you on to the next, and now let the other one work. I know some of you are still struggling. I will, however, not interrupt you, but I will pause you. I will show you kind of my solution if it makes sense. You can feel free to continue working after I show you this. What I did, new middleware, I added a authentication middleware, which takes a token storage, which basically is just a place that holds token objects. It's nothing fancy. And what this does is basically looks at the new request. It looks if they have the special parameters for reading passwords from HTTP basic. And I check if this is not admin, I don't care. I just go to the next middleware. If it is admin and you don't have entered your username, I'll give you this 401 response saying, hey, you should log in. And if I'm logged in, I don't bother to check anything. So I just save it, use the token storage, and then move on to the next one. And you could, of course, use like a user provider or something to fetch that username from the database and look, does the password really match this? And then you have it stored a user object in token storage. But I'll choose to make things simple for me here. And in my kernel, I just said, hey, this add another middleware. And when I run this, I try to access admin. I got a page looking like this, and I can enter my credentials, and I can get a like hello username response back. And that very controller, it's not super cool. It's just use the token storage and fetches the latest use from the token storage and just print the username. Does it make sense? Good. And what about authorization? I mean, I told you it's different between user authentication and authorization. And authorization, I know some of you was looking into voters, because voter is a really cool idea. It's basically, you know, solid, the open-close principle. A voter is a great way to add new functionality. You add the new voter classes without changing this specific class. So I don't know if you can. I'm pretty sure that you can read and understand this. It's basically loops over all our voter interfaces and check and ask them to vote. And they say like, and each voter says, yes, I grant this, or say no, I deny access, or they say, I abstain, I don't wanna vote. And if someone grants access, then we let them through, or if someone denies access, then we block it. So a simple voter looked like this. I can check if the username is not Tobias and the URL is admin, then you should deny it. So it's only the user Tobias that has access to the admin page. And my service declaration for the security stuff looks like this. I can just add all my voters, and I put them in the on the middleware security, I put all my voters there. And in my kernel, I just add the voter. I add it after the authentication, because first I need to know who you are, and then I can ask, what can you do, right? I can't do the opposite order. And if I don't add Tobias, I get a forbidden page. We have about half an hour left. You can continue working on security if you like to. I will talk about toolbar, because I will skip the toolbar. I will say, I mean, you know the fancy toolbar that we had at the bottom of the page, maybe says what IP you're requesting from or how many cache requests you're doing. It's just a middleware. And the middleware that listens, I mean, that you run after the router, that the router returns a response, and the toolbar middleware just look at the response and modify it a little bit. And I've written it like this. I just take the response, take the body, the HTML, and just add some other HTML behind it. And you might wonder, how can I really get cache information? Because here I have, like on some row, cache calls. How do I get that information? What I do is, I decorate my cache service. So, my cache service, and I decorate like putting a service around it. And, oops. And I'm just, whenever you call get item to the cache decorator, it just saves it somehow, like this calls and it saves it somehow with some metadata, and then you just call the real object. So this is how I can get information about how a service is being used. And I only decorate this in development mode, because this obviously takes longer time than calling the service directly. So I only do this in development mode, or in development environment. And the result of this is I can get a toolbar looking like this. Not very nice, but it's still is. So I give you two options now. Either you continue working on the security thing, or I want you to implement exceptions. I mean, what if we have a controller looking like this? This is obviously, it will throw the page with a good stack tree saying, hey, you got an exception here. That's not very nice to show to your end user, right? You want to have a pretty page saying like, hey, something wrong happened, we will take care of this. And in development, you want to say, hey, this is a full stack trace, this is what it did, and you have links and stuff. Either you add this middleware, or you continue working on the security stuff. It's about 10 minutes, and then I will ask you to do one last thing after that. Feel like you understand the exception thing? Excellent. You can restart from the toolbar 8 toolbar branch, or you start from your code. I will rudely interrupt you for the last time. No, not the last time. Second last time. The way I implemented this is I thought, new thing, new middleware, let's create something like this. I put this middleware first, and the only thing you do, I run the next middleware, and I surround this with a try catch. So if some middleware down the line, or controller down the line, throws an exception, I will catch it here. And here I could be smart. Ooh, I'm saying we're not smart here. I could be smart to send the environment variable to this middleware, so you can see, oh, was it production? Write a pretty message. Oh, was it development? Write a helpful message. And obviously, like I said, I put this first. Here is the middleware being smart, but I show different production. You feel like you got it? It has been quite a lot of information today, right? I've been telling you a lot of things, and generally now, do we feel like we understand the things we've done, the things I've talked about? I know some worked with me, some they just listened to what I was saying, but we feel like we understand at least most of it. I mean, the project is quite large, or not large, it's quite small. It looks like this. We have the configuration, we have the index file, we have some controllers, we have middlewares, we have the wrapper I told you about, the data collector, and we had some security voters and stuff, we had a kernel. It's not many files. And I've asked you during the way if you understand all the files, what they were doing, and it felt like you understand most of it, right? It felt like we understand all of it, right? The concept of all of it. And our composition looks like this. It's pretty small. It's nothing super exciting here. We've been sitting here for about 2.5 hours on a workshop labeled Symfony for Internals. We haven't really been talking about Symfony. I barely mentioned Symfony at all, and you barely written any Symfony-related code at all. But I'll claim the framework we built now is Symfony. It's exactly how Symfony works. I mean, we have the HTTP objects. We have this request and response thing. We have the controllers. I mean, and this is the place where the framework interacts with our code. We have the event loop. We only have one event loop. We only have the request one. Symfony has 6 event loops. So we have one relay builder, right? Symfony have 6 of them. So it basically have one for the request that we had, and they have one for controller and response, stuff like that. We also had the caching thing that Symfony comes with. We use PSR6. Symfony has their own PSR6 implementation. We know what a container is. We know how to build our container. We know how to use the container in different environments. We also know how the super duper fast Symfony 4.1 router works. We know exactly how it works. I mean, the massive regular expression thing, I mean, on the massive array with static routes, that's how Symfony router works under the hood. It builds that for us. And we also have a look at security. We know how the security voter works. I mean, sure, we only looked at HTTP basic security, but this is the same concept, same everything for all kinds of security mechanism, or secure authentication mechanisms. And we also looked at the toolbar. We know how Symfony toolbar works now. I mean, with all these wrapping services, all the data collectors, data collectors. Symfony has a bunch of them for different components, different services. That's how they write this toolbar. I mean, our toolbar was plain HTML and pretty boring, but and Symfony's toolbar is also plain HTML, but some CSS. We also now just looked at the exception page. I mean, Symfony write this exception page for you, and that's awesome and super helpful. And now we know how they do it, right? They just catch all the exception and listens and print a nice response. And we implemented this ourselves. So I'll say what we just did, this is Symfony. This is Symfony exactly, or maybe it's a simple Symfony. The Symfony complete framework is also a bit more complex. It has, no, not complex. It's a bit larger because it covers all the edge cases. It covers all the weird edge cases that we don't really bother about as normal developers. There's something that our framework doesn't support that Symfony support. We don't have any CLI support yet, and we don't have support for third-party integrations. We don't have any bundles, so say. So if we want to make our framework more Symfony, we gotta do something like this. We gotta add the Symfony console. We gotta throw out the PSR7 implementation, add HTTP foundation. We gotta throw out the relay builder we're using and use an event dispatcher. And if we throw out the PHP cache and use Symfony cache, that's even more Symfony. And then instead of our custom kernel and custom security, we use the Symfony components for that still, instead. So this workshop is end of part 1 now. If we have 3 or 4 more hours, we'll do part 2. However, I'll leave that for you as homework. I will quickly go over, not the exercises, but more the solution. I mean, part 2 is basically do this. And I will do this now quickly. We have like 10 minutes left. And there's just one more exercise I want you to do. And I think that's the most important exercise of all the workshop. I will talk about that. I'll show you that later. So, part 2, let's make it more Symfony. And what's more Symfony than auto-wiring? You know how Symfony auto-wires everything by default? And why doesn't it slow us down? I mean, we have something like this in our services file. It takes everything and just make a service out of it. The thing that Symfony does, it makes every service private by default. Which means, say you have a lot of services like this. The one marked with P stands for public, P, not private, public, P for public. And Symfony looks at all the services, what their dependencies are. I mean, that service, I mean, what other service does it depend on, etc. And build a map, something like this. And then it looks on the private services. I mean, if it's a private service that's not... that nobody depends on, we just remove it. I mean, how about this service? Nobody depends on that, so we removed it. And how about that service? We just remove that as well, because nobody's using it. Nobody's requesting it, because Symfony knows exactly which services that are used because of the service declaration. And the same thing with that service, etc. So since every service is provided by default, Symfony can easily remove the things that it's not services or not user services. That's why we don't slow things down by register our models as services, because that's wrong, obviously, but we don't have any performance penalties. Fair? So what we could do here is just change, instead of having our service declaration as random strings that we had before, we can just use the class definition, the fully qualified class name. And CLI support, just yell at me if you don't understand something. CLI support
which is the
pretty handy. And the thing Symfony does is basically adding a new front-end controller. Instead of index.php, we have console. And what we do, I mean, this looks pretty much like your index.php, right? You load the composer autoloader, and then instead of getting a request, you're getting some command line input, and then you start your container, and then you boot it, and then you just try to run the command. This is very similar to the front-end controller. Could we agree with that? Great. The event dispatcher, I mean, this is our heart in our application is the relay runner. Symfony using an event dispatcher instead, which is a bit more flexible. Because if we got in our relay builder, if we got an exception, we couldn't really add the toolbar to that exception, right? Because the toolbar was further down in the chain. So Symfony introduces multiple chains. So what we do here is we create one chain for incoming request. This is the kernel request, and we dispatch that, and we expect to have a response back. If we don't have a response back, we say this is not found. And then when we get the response, we say we dispatch the kernel response to make sure people can do changes to this. This is where the toolbar acts. And if we got an exception to this, we could also list to exceptions. So we can also have a toolbar listener on the exception. And with this is actually how Symfony components could be so separate from each other and still interact very well. Because we had middlewares, Symfony has components, and they're all using an event listener. Does it make sense? And obviously, Symfony doesn't use
Symfony still allows you to do it
using HP Foundation, and this is a big. It's a lot of files to change, but it's, I mean, in your framework, you're just switching out the implementations. You edit like all the files instead of request interface. You say request HP Foundation request.
But still.
And then we have the caching. Symfony has also a PSR6 cache, which is excellent and super fast. So if you want to throw out PHP caching in Symfony instead, that's just a one-line change pretty much. You change your service declaration. In our framework, we had a lot of code in the in our kernel. Symfony has a component called HP kernel, and which basically do all the things that we did in our kernel. So if we want to use this component instead, we basically have remove all the boring code in our kernel just to load our services. And one thing, This is us using the Symfony kernel. We just said that we basically just load the files. All the booting stuff and caching the container stuff, that's done not automatically. It's done by Symfony. So what you do here, I'm just adding some good paths. We already discussed the router, how to use the Symfony super fast router. And if I want to implement that in my framework, I just add some configuration. I just register these services. I register a service saying, here's a router service, and I register a service for the request stack, and also a router listener. So the router listener listens to kernel request and adds some data to it, and then make sure it can execute the controller. If that didn't make sense, that's perfect, because next exercise, the last exercise, is this. I want you to debug the HTTP kernel. I want you to check out, there's an exercise on part 2, exercise 8. It says check out this branch and just go in debug mode to debug what's happening in this HTTP kernel class. It's a few questions I wanted you to answer. It's basically what happened on this line, what happened on that line. You'll see it in the README. This is really, I believe this is really important to understand because this is really the heart of Symfony. And it's nothing new there, but I wanted you to actually debug it and see what's happening. So if you have a debug session, please do. I'll leave it to 5 minutes and then I have another 3 minutes roundup. So please do part 2, exercise 8. I'll do this on my screen. I believe you see the same things I see. So I checked out the branch, I started the server, and I started the debug session. If I go here, now I'm debugging. So this is the handle function. It's called handle raw, but in our framework we said handle. So what I'm basically doing is I put the request on the request stack, and then I create a new event, and I dispatch that new event. And what's interesting here is after dispatch new event, all my middleware, all the components or middlewares has been listening to this. So the request actually got some parameters that wasn't there before. This is the router middleware, the router event list, event subscriber that added these 3 parameters to my request. That's the only thing the router listener does. It adds things to the request. Then it might be another listener, like the firewall listener, that adds a new response to the event and says, hey, this is a 401 response. But luckily for us, next line, this didn't happen. So now we're trying to load the controller. We have a controller resolver, whatever, that's using these 3 parameters and actually returns us a controller or a controller representation. We want to allow others to filter this controller or modify this controller somehow. So we dispatch a filter controller event. Some may listen to that and change our controller. Hopefully that didn't happen. No, it did not happen. And so we got the controller. We know it's a proper controller. Now we're going to figure out what's the controller arguments. So we have a resolver for that as well. So get those arguments. And the arguments is only a request, as you may or may see here. So what we're doing now is, now we want to allow people to modify the arguments. And the arguments didn't change, good. So what we do now is this line, which this line executes the controller. This line is the line that integrates Symfony with your code. So this, as you can see, or maybe you can't see, in my debug toolbar here, I have a start page class, and then I have the method, and then I have the arguments. And this call user func array just calls it. So when I call my controller, I could get a response back, or I could get something else in response, right? Because you know in Symfony 2 and Symfony 3 it was popular to just return an array and then have something else look out the response automatically. And that's why if you didn't get a response, we execute a get response for controller result event and to get the result. There is a twig listener there that looks at the controller and see, hey, this is a twig file associated here. Let's take the response from the controller and put it on the twig file, stuff like that. But the good practice is to do it yourself. The good practice the controller should return. And our controller do return a response, so we don't do anything here. And then we just filter the response, which basically means allowing other components to modify this. This is what a toolbar does. Do we feel like we understand this? This is the core of Symfony. This is everything. I have a few quick slides, and then I leave it for lunch. So we did know this. We did go through this. The next exercise is the framework bundle. It's a way to allow other. It's basically framework bundle to register and do a lot of stuff for us. So everything is way more convenient. I mean, we had this kernel before when we register everything. It looks like a little bit like a mess. In the framework bundle, there's actually a. Oh, sorry. Yeah, it's actually a microkernel trait, which basically did all this. It's hide all this complex. So we have only two functions here. So you configure your routes and configure your container. So we hid all its complex in the microkernel trait. So I will claim now, if you did part 1, went excellent. If you continue with part 2 and do the things I briefly mentioned here, and if you compare that result with Symfony Flex, it's very much the same. I mean, completing part 2, we built Symfony Flex. And since you all understand part 1, you all understand part 2, you haven't built it, but you understand part 2, I will actually claim that we all here are Symfony experts. We all here know how Symfony works. We have mentioned all the important components, we know how the heart works, we know how the kernel works, we know everything. We are the experts now. And I want you to have that message with you and go to lunch. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.